Wow, guys, I am sorry I'm late. My Mac crashed like 2 minutes before I was supposed to go live. So I'm joining as quickly as I can. I'm still setting up um, my desktop. It actually kind of reordered my displays on me. So I've got quite a lot of rearrangement to do. Of course, I don't know where my notes are anymore. Yay. But hey, that's not my problem. Or sorry, that's not your problem. That's my problem. So I'm getting that back together. While I'm getting that together, I did actually think of a story I thought was interesting the other day. As I mentioned to you that I had taught myself how to code. I taught myself how to code when I was like 10 years old. And every now and then, I run into someone who thinks that's impressive. That's not impressive. I have an impressive story for you, just so that we can sort of set the baseline of what my idea of impressive is. Hey, I've got some of this set up. I'm missing my notes still. So the first Russian I ever worked with was this guy named Andrew. And Andrew also taught himself how to code in C++. Now, granted, he was older than 10 at the time. He was an adult, but he learned only using the Borland C++ user manual, just the manual that comes with the compiler. But that's not the really impressive part. The impressive part is he didn't know English at the time, and it was the English edition. So he literally couldn't read the text. He didn't know English. All he was doing was learning from the examples. I mean, he could read none of this, but he still taught himself C++. And I worked with Andrew for years, and Andrew, hey, if you're out there, man, I still think of you from time to time. You were one tenacious dude. So anyway, I was going to talk about legislation today, and there's a lot of exciting things in the news. You know, I was seeing that Trump's trying to get people angry at China again. I definitely want to talk about that. And people are talking about tariffs again. I don't like tariffs. I definitely want to talk about that. There's just lots and lots of stuff to talk about, but it's sort of, for me, it's the you can't have your pudding until you eat situation. Oh, and since Christy's here, don't worry, Christy, I'll keep this short. Inside joke. But um, yeah, so I was saying it's kind of like a meat versus pudding situation, as all this other stuff is fun to talk about, but I'm asking you to make me a legislator. And at some point, we should probably talk about legislation, where I stand on legislation, you know, my guidelines for how I decide what is good versus bad legislation, maybe go through a few examples. And I realize that's a little more in depth than you normally hear. Normally, you just hear people shouting that you should get excited about this or excited about that. I want you to actually know how I would vote on things, how I stand on things, and also why. Because I think they're good things for you to consider regardless of who you're voting for, regardless of which race. I think we should just be a lot more rational in what we actually stand for. So I've got some notes, as I mentioned. I lost when my Mac crashed, but there they are. Some things on Mac work very, very good. Avoiding crashing is no longer one of them. Anyway, but I'll try not to stare at the notes the whole time. So the first thing was something I kind of learned as a child is it's not just wanting to do good. Everybody wants to do good. Everyone wants to feel helpful, and you know, you can see this in 6 and 7 year olds. They're always very eager to help, and you know, dad gets mad and the wife reminds them they're just trying to help, and yeah, that's good. That's fine for like a 6 or 7 year old. People going to Congress need to be a little much more mature. It's nice that you want to help, but what really matters is that you do help, that you actually have a positive impact. And this gets into the conversation of unintended consequences, because it really I mean, it's nice if your intentions are good, but what really matters is the consequences. And over time, the consequences are almost always determined by the changes in people's behavior. A lot of times around legislation, I talk about this in terms of unintended consequences, or in some contexts, they'll talk about moral hazards. Moral hazard isn't, like swearing. It's not a hazard they're going to swear. That's not what they're talking about. We'll talk about moral hazard another time. But my point is, you just can't, if you just pass a law that says we're going to change this, sometimes the way people actually act around that causes it to be destructive. So we don't want people to drink, and as a result, we got organized crime. So the other one is I'm really big on people negotiating relative values, and everybody always runs straight to money because we think of value in terms of money all the time. But I was thinking of what else we could talk about, and these days haircuts are getting kind of precious, and I'm not a pedicure person, but I hear some people want their petties back. So instead of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Maybe it's you cut my hair, I'll give you a pedicure. But how many haircuts does it take to pay for a pedicure? I don't know. I've honestly never given either. So I don't know what a fair trade is. Now, when I go to Washington, I'll be blessed with infinite wisdom, and I'll know the rate. It doesn't work that way. To decide, you have to actually be one of the people. You have to be engaged in this, and there'll still be disagreement. So this is something that's best worked out between people. You can't take a committee or a group of people 2,000 miles away and magically they know what the right ratio is. And the ratio even varies from circumstance to circumstance. So I like to keep government out of deciding values of things or relative values of things, because it's really the parties that are participating in that have to decide that. And anytime you try to set it from a fixed location from afar, then what happens is you end up with a surplus of participants on one side and a deficiency on the other. So you decide that it takes 50 haircuts to pay for a pedicure, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of people willing to do pedicures and nobody willing to do haircuts, or you see how that works. The other thing I wanted to point out is while governments have a role in preventing people from being defrauded, they have a role from people from hurting one another. Decisions on what's best for the individual is really left to the individual, and that's back to the haircut pedicure thing. Maybe we decide as a nation that a 1-to-1 ratio is fairly okay. But maybe I pay 5 times as much for pedicures via giving haircuts because you've not seen my toes. That decision has to be left for me. Another thing I wanted to talk about is discovery of relative values works best when there's lots and lots of players. And I know this is kind of dry, but I think it's important to understand how people think about things like this, because this guides you through more than what I think on a particular decision. Hopefully over time, you'll be able to hear of something I've never even heard of and have some ideas to where I would fall on it. Discovery of relative values works best when there's a lot of people at the negotiating table. And there's kind of a problem with legislation in that the greater the number of rules that apply to either side of the table, the harder it is to be on that side of the table. If you've got tomes and tomes and tomes of books you have to study in order to be able to legally give a haircut, then maybe you don't want to give haircuts that bad. Maybe you want to go do something else. So, all of a sudden this throws off the ratio because there's only one qualified person in the whole nation to give a haircut. Haircuts are going to get really expensive, and pretty much they're going to go however that person wants them to go. And then in response to that, we're going to feel like there's going to need to be a lot of regulation around haircuts, because I paid $50,000 for this haircut, yet this hair is out of place. We have to do something about that. Another one is, and this dovetails with the last one, is there are natural monopolies and oligopolies. And what I mean by that is sometimes there's just not going to be many people on one side of the table or the other. And a simple example of that is who brings running water to your house. The idea of having 15 different companies to choose from for bringing running water to your house is just going to be a topological nightmare. You're going to have pipes running everywhere. It's not really going to work. So you're going to end up with a very limited number of people, usually one, who can bring running water to your house. As a result of that, people who offer services like that need regulated. Also, I know a lot of libertarians will go, "What the hell, Rob?" But banking needs regulated. Banking needs regulated for kind of a crazy reason. It's because we literally give them the ability to create money. That's for a conversation on another day with fiat currency. But when you borrow money from a bank, they're not taking that out of somebody else's money. They're literally writing money into existence. That's something they're allowed to do in the fractional reserve system. And if you're going to allow somebody to just literally write money into existence, that takes oversight. So yeah, sometimes, and I'm not for that system. I think that's a goofy power to give someone, and as soon as you give them that, you have to regulate the heck out of it. So, but you see my point. Once you do one, you have to do the other. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and this was kind of brought up by the presidential debate, the libertarian presidential debate that LPKY hosted this last Saturday, is they were talking about incrementalist. And I'm not going to endorse anyone because I'm also a delegate, and I'm going to decide very late in the process and keep a very open mind. But among my favorite candidates are someone who would do a very good job passing a libertarian purity test, and someone else who got accused of being an incrementalist, and they are an incrementalist. And I got to thinking about it, and I'm like, oh heck, I'm an incrementalist. So I wanted to describe this. Am I one? Effectively, yeah. But it's not that my beliefs represent incrementalism. It's more like my tactics do. But I feel it's really important to be open on where I stand on things. So a topic that had come up for me earlier in the campaign was legalization of drugs. So I'm in the war on drugs person. I don't think drugs are good or cool. Never tried an illegal drug. I know among some people that's uncool of me. I don't care. I think ultimately you need to learn to cope with who you are in the world. And I think introducing extraneous chemicals just complicates that. I don't think it's a good way to go. That said, I think the war on drugs does much, much more harm than good. Back to my first point, it's not your intentions that matter, it's the actual impact. Now, at the same time, I don't think that's going to be the next move. So I'm pro medical marijuana, absolutely, of course, and I've got some stories around that on why I'm extremely passionate about that. I think a lot of people should be extremely passionate about medical marijuana, and I'm all on board for working with whoever on medical marijuana. Legalizing marijuana in general. By the way, I've never tried marijuana, but I've observed it a lot. It scares me a lot less than the other drugs, and I think it scares a lot of people a lot less than the other drugs. And there's going to be people who are willing to work with that, but not legalization of everything. And of course, I would work with them. And there's other topics like banking regulations for the dispensaries, and then there's hemp, which is another entire line of insanity because I drink hemp milk, love hemp milk, I eat hemp seeds. Some of my favorite clothes are actually made out of hemp. Hemp's a good material. It's a good plant. We can be doing useful things to it, and the fact that we've been shunning this plant for what, 70 years, thereabouts, 80, because it can be used other ways. You have to grow it other ways, by the way. Nobody's going to smoke a 12-foot hemp stalk. It doesn't work that way. They wouldn't get anything out of it. But the fact that that's illegal is crazy. So these are low-hanging fruits. These are fruits I would go after first, and I would work with people on picking those fruits first. Does that make me an incrementalist? Maybe. If that means incrementalist to you, I'll accept that label. But I'm not going to hide from anyone about the fact that I think we should end the war on drugs. And I think it's important to keep expressing why we should end the war on drugs. And I think it's important to be open with those that you're working with where you stand on things, because otherwise you're kind of being a little deceitful. I mean, it's not that I want to trick people into maybe seeing if it's okay with marijuana. It's that we should at least do it with marijuana. Oh, by the way, everybody's going to learn something from doing that. We should be open and honest with each other and sort of on that journey together. It's just, in my mind, the end of that journey ends in ending the war on drugs. Okay, so let's go over some legislation. I think screen sharing was actually where my Mac crashed before, so if I suddenly hang up on you, I'll just call you guys. I'll just do this again tomorrow, but hopefully it'll go fine. So share screen. Screen is it? So I've got 3 topics picked out for us. These I actually think I will actually keep short. We'll see. And I said these were in the context of COVID-19. And I love this one in that respect because the bill below is as of May 21st, 2019. I still think it very much applies. This is Thomas Massey's PRIME Act. This is HR 2859. And if you go on here, you'll see Mr. Perry. That is a different Mr. Perry. I was like, oh, look, I'm already, no, that's not me, that's somebody else. But in short, what Mr. Massey's saying here is that we should allow custom slaughterhouses to be exempted from the inspection requirements when you're selling to household consumers within the United States, or restaurants, hotels, or boarding houses, so on and so forth. And he has some extra stipulations here. So I love this because I grew up on some meat that, I got to actually reading some of the code around this and getting into it. I grew up on meats that were maybe illegal, but I made it through. I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good about eating meat that was processed locally, raised by my neighbors. I think this could even end up being a urban versus rural thing a little bit. I think those of us that grew up in rural areas, we grew up with this. I'm not sure how legal it was in all of our cases, but this has been a hot topic for many of us for many years. And sure enough, Thomas Massie was trying to get something done about this last year. Well, it comes into play now, because I've always felt that there was more danger in bacteria in your mass industrial meat processing plants anyway, rather than the local ones. I don't have any statistics to back that up. Then again, I don't have any statistics the other way, nor have I heard anyone tout them. Just this wild theory that if we put enough processing into one building and we stare at it enough, we hire enough people to make sure it's safe, it will be safer. Is it? I don't know, but in COVID-19 days, it sure as heck not. And this is one of those things that if we pass it in a rush right now, it might help a little. It could help. But what we need is for this to have been passed 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's sort of back to the idea of you want a lot of players on both sides of the table. You want a lot of choice. And that's that, I mentioned people being angry with China at the top of this. And the next couple of years, you're going to hear a lot of people talking about diversity of supply chain. And they're going to preach that, and they're going to say that, they're going to want to pass laws around it. And then when you look at what they're going to do, it's not actually going to be diversity. It's going to be consolidation to what they think is right. But this is an example of Mr. Massie being incremental. I think I even read somewhere he referenced it as a first step. It's a good, solid first step. I think we should be taking it. It's maybe too late to help with COVID-19, but let me go to the top again. That was HR 2859. Check it out, see what you think. I highly recommend you call whoever your current representative is, and you ask them about it and ask them what they're doing about it. And if you happen to live in D2 and you don't like the answer of your rep, vote for this guy, because I will absolutely support this and everything that looks like it. Spent a lot of time on that one. I'm going to spend less time on the next two. Mitt Romney proposes a $12 an hour bonus for U.S. essential workers through July. Kind of going through this is he's got some rules around it, and of course we have to decide what is an essential worker, and some of it's also to compensate for the extra money going to the unemployed right now. This totally violates my perspective on letting people sort out relative values for themselves. And I appreciate that part of it is in response to us having already tampered with the value of, well, I'm saying that wrong. I don't want to say the value of being unemployed, but we've rewarded people who aren't employed beyond what some of the people who are employed are. But still, I view this as a misstep to compensate for a misstep. I understand some people need the 600. It's not that I have anything against you, but once you change that, or once you change the minimum wage, and that's really what the 600 was targeting. I mean, if you divide the 600 by 40, you get 15. Oh, look, we're adding $15 an hour minimum wage to people who are unemployed. That progresses through the supply chain, and I want to talk about that sometime. I'm actually in a career. I'll be probably one of the few beneficiaries of that, at least in the short term, because as wage prices go up, people always want to automate stuff. So frankly, my friends will get a lot of phone calls. Can you automate this? Can you automate that? But over time, the price of everything goes up. It's a wash. But we see Mr. Romney trying to expedite that process here, but only for select people who are essential. We're just talking market distortion. I'm sure he means well, but there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences of this, like there were a lot of unintended consequences of the first step. So yeah, it's just piling on. Nope, not my thing. This one I'm cheating on. Oh man, we will never find it where I restarted. Okay, I can do it from memory. You can go find this. I was going to show. I actually tweeted this at some people. I tweeted it at Massey, Amesh, and Rand Paul. You know, I didn't really expect them to go, well, if Rob says so, you know, nothing like that. They don't know me. But sometimes you do a Hail Mary. You know, you come up with this idea and you just throw it out there and you hope somebody gets it. So it was kind of my idea fairly early in the shutdown. People were talking about how to do all these bailouts. So I thought I would sort of show off how I think about stuff like this. Maybe you'll think it's horrible. Maybe you'll think it's great. We'll find out. So my take is you always do harm while taxing. And this gets back to me being an incrementalist. I know we're not going to change the entire tax code, and I don't even try to with this. But still, nonetheless, you're doing harm when taxing. You may hope to do good with it later, but you're doing harm with it as you take the money away from people. So for example, employers. So in this case, we had a really obvious example. I'm gonna quit sharing entirely. None of that's cool. So we had a really obvious example in that we had employers who were going to be trying to keep their employees on, but at the same time, they're paying Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, you know, the 7.5% the employee pays. That's coming out of their pocket. You know, they're paying the 7.5% that matches that. If you go fairly low wage, you're talking about there's another 12%. So you have, you know, 27% right there of, you know, what the employee earns. So say they're earning $1,000 a week, you know, they're actually taking home, what did I say, 12? So they're actually taking home more like $710. And the employer is sending about $280 to the federal government. So rather than us have all these clever machinations on how much to send to who where, I thought the simplest thing to do would just be to tell businesses, if you have employees who you are keeping on and they cannot deliver value to you because of COVID-19, whether that's they're taking care of their grandmother, or they have COVID, or they're really afraid they're going to get COVID and you're just letting them take time off, or you closed your plant, whatever it is, if you're unable to deliver that, if you're unable to receive value from your employees that you're continuing to pay due to COVID-19, just keep the money that you would normally send the federal government. You know, so out of that 1,000, the 280, keep it. You know what? I mean, now instead of being able to afford to keep that employee at home for 3 weeks, you can keep them at home for 4 weeks. And we don't have to send out checks. There's very little logistics. I mean, I appreciate that some people would get paranoid that it would be abused. You could do an additional form of tax audit, but in my mind, you're just taking harm the federal government's already doing every single paycheck, and you're saying, you know what, in this time of crisis, in this particular instance, we're going to stop doing that harm. That way employers can keep their employees on a little bit longer. So hopefully that gives you some insight into how I think about things. I'm sorry I wasn't a little more prepared. I actually was prepared, and then my machine crashed and I had to reboot and everything was unorganized on me. this happens too much longer, I'll get another machine. What I'll do. But I'll try to always be on time. I was literally watching the clock count down because I'm a stickler for that. I know time is precious. I have a few ideas on what I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but I'm interested in talking about what you want to talk about tomorrow. So let me know, and stay safe. Do try to slow the spread of this disease. I'm a let's get back to work person myself, but that is going to cause some people to get ill, and that means we need to be doing absolutely everything we can that's affordable to keep as few people ill as we can. There are people out there. There are some of our friends and neighbors for whom this is a very dangerous disease, and we absolutely need to limit the spread. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.